I decided to go into 1 Timothy chapter 4 for tonight's thing, and to give a little bit of context of what's going on and kind of the structure of everything. And we look at a lot of the New Testament as books, and we refer to them as books, but in this instance, Paul wrote this as a letter to Timothy, a man whom he saw as a son and referred to as a son. And so, at least a son in the spirit. And so he's writing this letter to him, and he's been, be strong in this, be strong in that, and he's continuing this, and so he's come into chapter 4, and he's wrapping up this letter and giving Timothy this final charge in this letter. And he starts off in verse number 1, saying, I charge thee therefore before God, the Lord Jesus Christ, who shall judge the quick and the dead at his appearing in his kingdom. Preach the word, be instant in season and out of season. Reprove, rebuke, exhort with all longsuffering and doctrine. For the time will come when they will not endure sound doctrine, but after their own lusts they shall heap up to themselves teachers having itching ears. And they shall turn away their ears from the truth, and shall be turned into fables. And watch thou in all things, endure afflictions, and do the work of an evangelist, make full proof of thy ministry. And so, getting into this last part, Paul's saying, look, Timothy, he's not just saying, look, I want to just ask you to do this. He says, I charge you to do this. He says, I give you this in about every fiber of my being, that I can tell you the importance of doing this, and I put it to your account that you must do this. He goes, go and continue to teach. He says, go preach. And he says, preach the word and be instant in and out of season. And it's interesting. Nowadays, we use season as an expanse of time in our lives. But when you're looking at season here, it's not so much more an expanse of time, but a setting and you're in. And so he says, when you've planned for it and when you haven't planned for it, be ready. He says, for the times that you have planned to preach and share the Lord and preach the word, be ready for that. But he says, but you're also going to find times where you're not going to have that opportunity to prepare for it. And so for those seasons as well, for those times, be ready. And he gives them how to do this. He says to reprove, to rebuke, and to exhort. Now, to put it into not King James words, he says to convince, to call out, and to build up. Or in other words, to teach. And it's interesting that he says these three things, and he says it in this order. Because how are you going to tell someone that what they're doing is wrong in the eyes of the Lord if they don't first believe that what the Lord says to do is right? And so he says, first off, convince them. He says, tell them everything that they need to know in a manner in which they also, too, will believe it. And he follows it with, he says rebuke or call out. Because everyone, everywhere is going to have something that they're doing that's not exactly right. And he says, call it out. He says, if you want to see change in people, you've got to be able to call out what's bad so they know how to fix it, or know what to fix, per se. And he says, build up, exhort, teach. He says, tell them how to do it right. It's one thing to tell someone that what they're doing is wrong, but it's another thing not to tell them how to replace it, or tell them how to fix it. Tell them what to put in its place to make it better so that they can actually grow. And he says, why do you need to do this? Why does it need to be in such a manner? He says it this way. He says, for the time will come when they will not endure sound doctrine, but after their own lust shall they heap up themselves teachers having itching ears. See, everyone wants to hear something that will make them better. And sometimes that something that they think will make them better is the thing that they're hoping will validate what they're already living in. And so if they hear something that goes against something they believe themselves to be good, they're going to go find someone, even if they have to basically make this person themselves, that will validate what they're saying. Everyone, I don't know myself, I want to be told that I'm doing a good job. I don't want someone just coming up to me out of the blue just saying, "Oh, Orrin, why do you do that way? Like that's just a load of crap. And like you shouldn't do that." It's like, no. I know sometimes I need to be told that. I can't tell you how many times at my job I've been working at. And I did go to Sewella for automotive technology, but I can tell you there's a lot of things Sewella didn't teach me that OJT, or on-job training, has taught me. I tell you, one of the first few days I was working at the shop, Paul says, "All right, go figure this problem out." I said, "All right, do you have this, this, and this?" He says, "What?" He goes, "Yeah, I have that, but you ain't need that. Here, let me show you. See this thing? Pick it up. Is it popping? Yeah. All right, it's good. Is this one working? No, then it's not good. That's what you need to fix." And I mean, I wouldn't have thought about that. I wouldn't have thought to pick one thing up to see if you could hear it. I just know if it's working, it's working. And so there's been things that he has taught me on the job through great patience, I might add, on his part. But he had to also sit there and say, "Orrin, this thing that you're doing here is not at all the most efficient way to do it." He says, "Why are you going the long way around of doing this?" Or, "Orrin, that's not even the right part." And so there's things, even in that sense, I've had to be called out on the bad habits that I had and have them fixed. And he taught me new habits to put in those places. Now, at Sewella, they just said, "Oh, good job, you got it done." And not necessarily in the most efficient. That's not me dogging on Sewella. They did the best they could with the one professor that they had for that part. And he did his best, and I did learn quite a bit from him, but there's a bit that OJT does it on its own. And so he's saying, look, he says, this is the reason why you need to go preach. He goes, because people will go after things that will tell them that what they're doing is right when it's not right. Because they love these things. And it's not just a matter of, "Oh yeah, I like it. It's a lust, it's a desire." It's something that they feel like they have to have. And so you need to go there and convince them, one, that what they're doing is wrong, tell them that it is wrong, and then show them how to do it better. And it says, "And they shall turn their ears away from the truth and shall be turned unto fables." He goes, and they're going to look at things that they even know is false. They're going to turn away from what is truth. Some of them will know it and some of them won't. He says they're going to sit there and turn away from it, and they'll look at these things because it makes them feel validated. It makes them feel good. And what's interesting, though, is when he's dealing with people, and he tells us how to do these things. He says at the end of chapter, end of verse 2, he tells Timothy to exhort with all long-suffering and doctrine. He says, build them up with patience and good teaching. He says, because he's probably not going to learn it the first time around. Because if they're anything like me, I don't learn a lot of things the first time around. I'm pretty knot-headed sometimes, according to my grandmother. I'm brave enough to say that because she ain't here. But he says, but give it some time. He says it's going to take time, and you have to teach them with good doctrine too. You have to teach them with good teachings, because you can put anything in its place, but make sure that they're getting what's good. And how do you give them what's good? Well, first you have to absorb what's good. You have to first learn what's good. So it's important to us, if we're going to go out and do this, as the Lord has told us to go out and make disciples. If we're going to go out and make these disciples, and we're going to go and try to teach people what it is to live for Christ, we ourselves must first have good sound doctrine, have good sound teaching in our lives, so that we could go to people and be able to identify, what are they doing wrong? How can they live better? How can I put something in this place, or teach them a way to look into God so that He can show them how to change this wrong way of living out for a good way of living that will actually benefit them and build them up. And Paul goes on to finish out the chapter. He builds on to that. He says in verse 6, "For I am now ready to be offered, and the time of my departure is at hand. I have fought a good fight. I have finished my course. Oh, my bad. I skipped verse 5. He says, watch thou in all things, endure afflictions, and do the work of evangelist, make full proof of thy ministry. He tells him, look, he goes, have patience and keep in it's not going to be easy doing this, because you're going to be going against the grain. Because people are not going to want to let go of the things they love to do the most. Of these lusts that they have, these desires that they have, they're not going to want to let go of it easy. And then he goes in and he goes, I'm now ready to be offered, and the time of departure at hand. He goes, I fought a good fight, I have finished my course, I have kept the faith. Henceforth there is laid for me a crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, shall give me at that day, not only to me, but unto all of them also that love his appearing. He says, Timothy, he says, I don't have much left. He goes, I feel the Lord's getting ready for me to come home. And I've poured out everything that I have. He goes, I've done everything that to the best of my abilities, and I've kept as much faith as I can. He goes, and I'm looking forward to seeing the Lord one day with that crown of glory he has waiting for me. And it's not just for me that he's got this crown for. He's got it for everyone. And this, the final part, and verse 9 to the end, it shows us something that I believe a lot of people forget. And it's this. Yes, the Lord used Paul in extraordinary ways. And the Lord used Paul time and time again and did a great many things through him. But at the end of the day, Paul was human. And we see this as he closes out this letter. He says, do thy diligence to come shortly unto me, for Demas hath forsaken me, having loved this present world, and is departed unto Thessalonica. Crescens to Galatia, Titus to Dalmatia. Only Luke is with me. Take Mark and bring him with thee, for he is profitable to me for the ministry. Antiochus have I sent to Ephesus. The cloak that I left at Troas with Carpus, when thou comest, bring it with thee, and the books, but especially the parchments. Alexander the coppersmith did me much evil. The Lord reward him according to his works. For whom thee thou wear also, for he hath greatly withstood our words. At my first answer no man stood with me, but all men forsook me. I pray God that it may not be laid to their charge. He says, look, he says, Timothy, I'm alone now. Because everyone's left me except for Luke, either to go and just pursue things of this world, or I've sent them places to go do the Lord's work. And he says, also, bring my cloak. And he goes, it's about to get cold here. He goes, I need my jacket. He goes, I need my coat. And bring some books with me, because I can definitely use those books. And it kind of brings it all the way back around. He says great things throughout this letter, but at the end of the day, it was a letter. He used this letter to speak to Timothy. He said, look, he says, these are my needs. And this is going to show that the Lord uses anyone. And I've heard this used great many times, that phrase, the Lord will use ordinary people for extraordinary things, when they're talking about the disciples. And you look at each disciple's way of life, they're just common everyday people. But Paul was also common everyday people. He did a great amount of learning to be a Pharisee, but he was also a tent maker. He made tents. But it was through his work following the Lord in all the faith that he could ever muster that he did all of these great things, following every word that the Lord said, teaching this good doctrine. He lived out everything that he taught. And he tried his best to leave that good doctrine, that good teaching, in every place that he left behind. But also he was dealing with people, and he knew it was going to take time. That's why we have so many letters, because people got away from that good doctrine and started doing what they wanted to do, and Paul had to go ahead and call them out again and say, look, y'all are doing this wrong, and this is how you do it better. And he always did it from a place of love. That's a very important thing we got to understand. It's one thing to go out and call someone a bunch of yahoos that ain't getting nothing right. But it's also another thing to say, hey, brother, I understand that this is very much something that you love to do and you find great pleasure in it, but this is going to tear you apart. This thing that you're doing is only going to dig you a hole in a pit that you're never going to get back out of on your own. And we can call it out now while it's still something small and try to find a way of life that can help you walk in freedom and put you in a place where you can share this freedom with someone else. But you got to do it out of love. And I very do much want to stress the fact that Paul didn't start his ministry as a great teacher and great church planner. He started off as the enemy. And the Lord turned him into that. But he started off with a man who thought he was doing the right thing by being an enemy of the church, and put him back on the right way. So I myself challenge you with this. And I will say that I'm not a preacher, so I'm not as long-winded. But I will say this, I will challenge you with this. Don't allow yourself to talk yourself down, saying, "Oh, I'm just someone. I don't have that much to give. I don't have that much to teach." Guess what? Everyone had to start somewhere. Everyone starts from ground zero. And if you cannot teach sound doctrine right now or don't have the confidence to do so, learn it. Find someone who will teach. To be a disciple is to be someone who learns. And to make disciples, you got to be willing to teach other people. Jesus never told anyone to go and stop learning. At least if he did, it's not in any Bible I read. He says, go and make disciples while also learning yourself. He says that any point that we tell ourselves we're done learning is the moment where we've stopped, is the moment we make that true. So with that, I'll turn it over to Brother David. I'll challenge you, go and preach. Go and teach. Because if you don't, someone will.